My husband had told me to trust him, and he broke that trust, and there was nothing my husband could do about it because he wasn't here any longer.
And in doing the things he did, he took some things that you can't get them back. They're gone.
I wouldn't take the time to follow up on it simply because my life was full, and that's a poor excuse, but it's the truth.
I never thought that a person that I worked with and that I trusted would ever do a thing like that to me.
They didn't care. They just were out to make cash.
I'm Montana State Auditor John Morrison. My office oversees the securities industry. We license stockbrokers and firms and make sure they follow the law. We also investigate and prosecute fraud, often working hand in hand with county attorneys and U.S. attorneys. Our team has successfully handled the biggest securities fraud cases in our state's history. We work hard every day to help safeguard your money, but we know the best way to stop fraud is to prevent it. That's what this program is designed to do, to help you learn to protect yourself in the world of investing. Now I'm pleased to introduce you to the host for the show, my friend, Montana's own J.K. Simmons.
I'm J.K. Simmons, and I grew up right here in Montana. I'm a professional actor, but the people who will share their stories with you today are not actors. They're real Montanans who were defrauded. These people lost their money, sometimes their entire life savings, to fraud. And the person who stole their hard-earned dollars was their friend, their co-worker, even their relative. Someone the victims thought they could trust completely. These Montanans are sharing their stories today in the hope that you can learn from them and invest smart to keep your money safe. Tom O'Neill was born and raised in Butte. Considered a pillar of the community, he and his family had always been known and trusted by nearly everyone in town. But in December of 2000, the Montana Securities Department of the State Auditor's Office responded to a citizen complaint that Tom, a stockbroker with U.S. Bancorp Piper Jaffray in Butte, was making trades in a client's account without her permission. This complaint sparked an investigation that found that Tom O'Neill had taken advantage of his personal knowledge and relationships with 38 people in the Butte area to defraud them. Many of the victims were retired, disabled, or unsophisticated investors. 70% of the money Tom O'Neill defrauded them of was from retirement accounts. 3 of the victims were in their 90s. 7 were widows. 6 were disabled. All had been personal friends of Tom O'Neill or his parents, and all had trusted him completely.
I can't tell you how hard it was to make that phone call to the state auditor's office. Because I knew that Tom O'Neill had been my friend for a long time. He was someone that I trusted. And I made that phone call and immediately sat in the chair and cried because I felt that I had violated a trust and a friendship and that I had done something that I shouldn't have done.
The Tom O'Neill Piper Jaffray case began when Juanita Perriman from outside Anaconda, Montana, called the state auditor's office and told us that she was looking at her statements and saw some irregular transactions. She saw stock trades that she had not authorized. She saw frequent stock trades. She had been gone for a period of time, and when she came back, she looked at those documents and found that these transactions had taken place.
My husband was a very conservative guy. And he always did his business with Tom O'Neill, so it only seemed right that I would go to Tom O'Neill to help me deal with any kind of financial things that I had to deal with after his death. And I really felt like he was in the business to know what was absolutely the best for me at that point in my life. When I started opening that mail, they were all trades that had been done on my account. Trades that I had not authorized or even knew anything about because I was out of the country. I spread them out all over my house and tried to put some kind of semblance about what was going on here. So I had said to my lawyer, boy, there's a lot of trading going on in my account and I don't understand it. And he said, well, that's called churning and it's illegal.
Churning is when a broker buys and then sells a stock merely to generate a commission for himself. Tom O'Neill would buy a stock at 11 o'clock in the morning, then sell it at 1 p.m. that same afternoon with little or no change in the stock price. Then he charged his clients commission on both the buy and the sell orders. He was making unauthorized, unsuitable, and excessive trades in his clients' accounts for the purpose of generating commissions for himself. He was churning. Churning is illegal, and the state auditor's office vigorously prosecutes people who churn their clients' accounts.
I waited till my statement came, and when my statement came, I was in shock. And I called him up and I said, "Whoa, Tom, am I going to lose the farm?" And he said, "You just worry way too much. It's all about the bonds." And you know what? I hung up the phone and I looked at all the papers and I didn't even have any bonds. And I knew I was in trouble. And so in desperation, I called my young sister, works for a credit union, and I said, "Boy, I know there's something going on. I don't know what to do." And she said, "You know, why don't you call the state auditor's office, because they're the regulatory people."
Tom O'Neill was on our radar screen. A couple years prior to receiving the phone call from Nita, we had suspended Tom for unethical and fraudulent activities in his clients' accounts. He was someone that we had on special supervision in the past, and when his name came across my desk, I knew we had a serious problem. The department immediately conducted an examination of the Butte branch office of Piper Jaffray to see exactly what Mr. O'Neill was doing in his clients' accounts.
We were facing a broker firm that wasn't very cooperative. We sent our team down there to do an exam and they wouldn't let them in the door. They had to call us up here and get the attorneys on board right away to say, "All right, you don't want to open the door, we're going to suspend you."
Within 2 hours of being on scene at the exam, it was very clear to the department that Tom was engaging in the unethical practices of unauthorized trading, unsuitable trading, and excessive trading in his clients' accounts to the detriment of his clients.
Broker-dealer firms like Piper Jaffray are required to supervise their salespeople. Often they do this through something called exception reports, reports that identify unusual patterns of trading by a broker. The state auditor's investigation of the Butte branch office of Piper Jaffray uncovered hundreds of pages of these reports that clearly identified wrongdoing in many of O'Neill's clients' accounts. In the end, 38 people were identified as victims of Tom O'Neill's sales practice violations.
As the thing got going and the auditor's office began to prosecute the thing more fully, more and more people came, and after everything was all said and done, I think our firm represented about 18 separate plaintiffs.
Harry Willems worked as a janitor in Butte for years, and as far as Harry knows, he only has an 8th grade education. Harry dutifully put money in his retirement account.
Well, my wife was working too. At that time, she was janitoring with me, and we just kept what money we needed, and we put the rest in the savings account and in the bank, in the IRA, every month.
And when he finally retired, he moved his account to Tom O'Neill at Piper Jaffray. Unfortunately, Tom took advantage of that trust and that lack of sophistication and took Harry's retirement investments and immediately began buying speculative stocks, charging thousands of dollars in commissions and losing almost all of Harry's retirement money.
A broker makes money by buying and selling items for a client, whether it's a mutual funds or individual stocks or bonds or whatever. When he buys, there's a commission, and when he sells, there's a commission. It makes no difference whether the client made money.
Statement was supposed to come every month, and my mother was real sick, and I spent a lot of time with her, and I wasn't paying much time paying attention to anything else. I spent all my time with her, and the statement come, and I didn't open even some of them.
Tom O'Neill chose his victims carefully. He preyed on people he knew were unsophisticated investors, people who were older, uneducated, or who suffered from a medical issue. He would befriend his victims, earn their trust, and then use his personal knowledge of them and their circumstances to defraud them.
Margie McGrath is 60-some years old, suffers from cerebral palsy and other health issues, and lives in an assisted living facility.
Yeah, I've had cerebral palsy for 65 years, and I've been here for 10 years.
Margie McGrath worked with Tom when she was gainfully employed.
And Tom O'Neill was a good guy. He was respected by all the other employees, and he also was respected by the officials.
When she went to the assisted living facility after her mother died, she took with her her retirement account.
And I depended on him that he knew how to invest wisely. And he never called me or to tell me that they were going to put this here or that there or this investment. And I just figured that he was doing the right thing.
It would be very unusual to have trades done where the client had not been informed of it. In that case, it would really be a violation of your trust in the first place.
Many of the people trusted Tom O'Neill because of the personal relationship that he developed with them. Some had known him throughout their lives. We see this in a lot of cases where people win the confidence of their victims by participating with them in activities, by going to church with them, by being in the bowling league with them, or being in a bridge club with them, or by simply getting to know them on a personal level. The inherent trust that Montanans tend to feel for each other is even magnified when you're dealing with somebody who's come to you in a special relationship or in a position of trust.
I first met Tom when I was 6 years old, in the first grade, and we were in the same schools the whole way. Knowing someone that long, I mean, you just figure that, well, what the heck, I grew up with him. We played basketball, we did whatever, and he just, I never in a million years would have assumed he'd have done anything.
In selecting a broker, I think it's important that you have somebody that you can trust, but you need to verify. The worst thing that you can do is to just let things slide. If you have some concerns, you need to act on it.
Mike Paffhausen was a builder. He built homes. He knew nothing about the stock market. He sold a house and brought Tom $40,000 to invest in something that was safe and generated income.
1% interest in the bank, said, put it in the stock market, and Tom said, his words was, as I was walking out the door, I'll try not to lose it. Okay, good. That's what he said. Well, then all of a sudden you're getting all these margin things and don't understand. He borrowed money.
Margin trading is when a client borrows money from the firm in order to invest in the stock market. Tom O'Neill was churning his clients' accounts and also putting them on margin to do it. Not only were his clients losing their principal investment, they were actually owing money to Piper Jaffray on the margin loans. In an attempt to cover this fraud, O'Neill altered his clients' paperwork, changing their investment objectives without their permission from safety to speculative, then liquidating their conservative mutual funds and moving their money into highly volatile and risky stocks.
You're losing all this money, plus you're owing $5,000 margin. You've got to pay this next week. You've got 3 of those, and you're just going, oh my God.
Tom took that $40,000 of Mike's and personally earned over $65,000 in fees and expenses off of that amount and left Mike with absolutely nothing. Tom traded more than 600 trades without ever calling Mike and saying, do you want to buy this? Do you want to buy that? And when Mike walked away, he walked away with a mere $400.
Well, yeah, you just the greed. I mean, you're just thinking, how could you possibly do that to people? I mean, I just didn't assume that people would ever do that, you know, to that extent.
It's sad when anyone loses money, but it's sadder when somebody that's retired loses their retirement dollars. Once you retire, you don't have the ability to replace money that's lost in the market.
My mother had left me a small amount in insurance, and my late husband and I decided that we would take and put it in stocks.
Suzanne McGee is a retired nurse who is widowed and invested her retirement dollars with Tom to ensure that she had enough to live on for the rest of her life.
We decided to go with Tom because my late husband worked with him at the Montana Power and got to know him and liked him and thought that he would do the best for us. I wanted Tom to be conservative so that I would have money and wouldn't have to worry for the rest of my life about where the next dime was coming from.
She chose safety of principal and income as her primary investment objectives. Tom did opposite of those investment objectives.
The first time I found out that something was wrong is when the auditor's office called me and told me that I was one of Tom's victims. I found out that he had changed my security to speculative, and that was the first I had any inkling of what he had done that.
Clients were becoming concerned, but Tom O'Neill had an answer for everything. Don't worry about it, he'd tell them. It's just the market. It'll correct itself. And then he would sidetrack them with questions about their lives and families, playing on their supposed friendship and using his personal knowledge of them to distract and put them at ease.
I told him, I said, Tom, I'm going to take my money out here and take someplace else. And he said, no. I got it, and he said, I'm going to get it all straightened out. So I'm going straight out for you. And he said, I'll get it up there to $100,000.
Yeah, well, see, every time you'd walk in there, he'd go on about how's Kate and how's the family. He'd just continually evade the subject. You've got to be careful with people like that. They'll try to evade the subject. They don't want to admit to you that they're never going to admit to you they're doing anything wrong.
All I wanted was him to give me an answer about what was going on.
One of Tom's greatest talents is that he had an ability to make people think that everything was going to be all right. He was a great conversationalist, so he'd always find out what people were interested in, and whenever he wanted to, he would switch the conversations from their accounts to whatever topic he knew that they'd be interested in and talk about it.
You walk in there and he says, oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I'm worried about it, Tom.
He just told me that I worried way too much and everything was okay. I didn't have anything to worry about.
If you went to your broker and your broker said, oh, don't worry about it, it's okay, I've got it all under control, that might be a red flag to you. At that point, it'd be a good idea to go to the office manager and express your concerns.
And I tried to get a hold of him. I couldn't get a hold of him. I tried to get in a hold of the president of Piper Jaffray down. Everybody down there turned me down. Nobody tell me nothing.
While victims were rapidly losing their retirement accounts, Tom O'Neill was being rewarded for his extraordinary commission production at Piper Jaffray. Instead of recognizing the obvious signs of churning and putting an end to O'Neill's behavior, the company encouraged his conduct by giving him awards and free vacations for the millions of dollars in commissions he was generating for himself and Piper Jaffray.
Well, of course, Piper Jaffray, the corporation there, they knew exactly what was happening because they had to know. I mean, well, they were making money all the time.
Even as the supervisory wing of that brokerage firm was looking at this particular broker to determine whether illegal trading was taking place, the management end was sending notices to him saying, you've already won the trip to Cancun. If you can sell this much more stock by Christmas, you can win the trip to Rome.
Piper Jaffray was very confrontational, withheld information, and made it difficult for us to do our jobs.
We amended the case to include a charge of aiding and abetting. We charged the firm with assisting Tom O'Neill in his fraud. We named the branch manager, Bob English, as a person who aided and abetted.
If after talking to the broker and the manager of the office and then maybe even a regional manager, if you're not getting any satisfaction from them, go to the state auditor's office. Take all your material to them. Show them what has been done, show you what's happening in the account, and see what kind of an answer they might have for you.
We really believe that in white-collar crime, if the public has an appreciation that we're going to take these things seriously, that will lead to tips, whether it's to the auditor's office or to a federal investigative agency. If people have confidence, if the public has confidence in our abilities and our commitment, then tips will come in and we'll be able to have a more vigorous and full enforcement of the law, which is obviously our mission.
There's nothing more rewarding than having somebody come forward to the department that has a serious problem in their account and being able to make the problem right.
We had so many victims involved. There were a lot of widows, and there were people that had special medical needs, and there were people who weren't educated, and unsophisticated sorts. They were the salt of the earth. You want to have the right outcome for the people, and as regulators, that's really our job. We're here to protect investors.
What we did in the case in Butte was what this agency is capable of doing in cases where everything goes right. Basically, we were able to get about $1.5 million in investment dollars back for 38 investors, most of whom were located in the Butte area. We were able to impose a fine on a company because the company was, in that case, a part of the wrongdoing, in our opinion.
$1.5 million in Butte, you know, that's a lot of money, and we were really happy to be able to help people get that money back.
We've got a lot more resources dedicated and frankly a very talented group of investigators both at the state, local, and federal level that are able to bring these cases to fruition, and that's an exciting thing to have been part of.
The State Auditor's Office coordinates with county attorneys and federal authorities to bring criminal charges against perpetrators of fraud like Tom O'Neill. In this case, the State Auditor's Office promptly contacted federal authorities and involved them. The office also provided invaluable assistance to the federal prosecutor with their research and expertise on the matter.
In the Tom O'Neill federal case where he was charged federally and sentenced, he received a 2-year sentence, and the judge opted to go below the sentencing guidelines. I think justice was done because the fact that the man was put behind bars at all was pretty unique, and it was rewarding in that regard.
In the Tom O'Neill case, the court imposed a sentence of 2 years incarceration in federal prison. That outcome was a very satisfying outcome to both the investigators and the prosecutors, really because of the nature of the victimization and the fact that there were a number of elderly victims whose life savings had been converted through the illegal acts of Mr. O'Neill.
The sooner someone calls the state auditor's office, the better the likelihood is that we're going to be able to recover money that was lost in an illegal financial transaction.
If you think there's something wrong in your account, I would trust your gut instinct. You owe it to yourself and you owe it to other people to be the ears and eyes for the department and for other citizens in the state to ensure that our financial markets are safe and Montana's investment dollars are carefully monitored and kept safe from wrongdoing.
Tom O'Neill went to federal prison for his crimes. In October 2003, a historic settlement was reached in the case brought against U.S. Bancorp Piper Jaffray, numerous individuals on Piper's management team, and its former Butte stockbroker Tom O'Neill. The settlement included $1.5 million in restitution for 38 Montana victims, a $1 million fine paid to the state of Montana, a permanent ban from the securities industry for Tom O'Neill, and a requirement that Piper Jaffray change its awards program to not allow any broker that is the subject of a consumer complaint to participate in the program. The fine is believed to be the largest ever paid to a state securities regulator for this type of sales practice case. One of the more recent and one of the highest profile scams in Montana is the case of Pat Davison in Billings. Investors lost millions of dollars in a Ponzi scheme that turned out to be one of the largest frauds in Montana history. A Ponzi scheme is like robbing Peter to pay Paul. The perpetrator of a Ponzi scheme gathers money from investors and promises big returns on a phony venture. As new people invest, the perpetrator uses some of the money to pay what appear to be abnormally high returns to earlier investors. These investors then recommend the venture to others who eagerly invest, and so on. Eventually, however, the scheme runs out of new investors and the whole thing collapses. The only person who consistently makes money is the perpetrator who set the Ponzi in motion.
Everyone that knew Pat trusted him. I mean, there was no questions asked about the likability of Pat Davison. He was friend to all.
The first thing a good con man needs is to win the trust of the potential victim. You're going to win their trust. You're going to trick them. You're going to be their best friend. And that's what really hurts.
The family relationship, looking someone in the eye on a day off when they're in shorts, laughing over a beer, you can't hardly measure that trust. You can't measure it.
The most disturbing thing in this whole process is that he betrayed friendship for money, and that really, really bothers me.
And it was hard for us to believe that one who was so intimately familiar with us and whom we depended upon for professional services would do such a thing.
3 things that I really won't tolerate in my life is someone cheating me, stealing from me, or lying to me. And in fact, Pat did all 3 of those.
It's really a story of a man that was highly in the public eye in Billings and statewide, and a man who really fell from grace.
Pat Davison was a longtime and well-respected member of Billings society. He ran for governor of Montana in 2004. A CPA and a stockbroker for UBS Payne Weber, he was trusted by people to manage their investments.
My relationship with Pat Davison started in early '87, and we met because the Catholic school system was nearly going to close, and we were trying to figure out how to raise the money to keep the school open. And that's how I got to meet Pat. And I was extremely impressed.
Nick Cladis and Pat Davison, while at UBS, had a partnership, the Cladis Investment Group.
So I approached Pat about asking if he had an interest in coming into the industry. He came on board, and I was thrilled because I saw this as a wonderful opportunity for me to bring value added to clients.
But in the fall of 2006, the Montana Securities Department received a call from the daughter of a Billings couple who reported that something unusual was happening with investments her parents had made through Davison. That call resulted in an investigation that led to the discovery that Davison had been conducting an elaborate Ponzi scheme for more than 10 years. His victims were some of the best and brightest of the Billings community. They were smart, sophisticated investors with a lot of money to invest. Many were Davison's closest friends and associates. Some were even members of his own family. He took advantage of them all.
Pat Davison executed a Ponzi scheme on Montana investors for a period of at least 10 years, using 7 or 8 bank accounts dispersed across the state, 3 bogus companies, and fraudulent tax ID numbers.
They have to continue to have enough investors with enough money to keep the thing going. It will eventually collapse regardless of the situation.
Ponzi schemes are illegal, and the state auditor's office makes it a priority to shut them down and prosecute the offenders. Unfortunately, the only way to uncover this kind of fraud is if someone reports it. Often people are reluctant to come forward. They may be friends with the perpetrator or ashamed of being duped. If you think a friend or parent or even a neighbor is involved in an investment that doesn't sound right, don't be afraid to come to the state auditor's office on their behalf.
In the fall of 2006, I received a phone call from a young woman whose father had some grave concerns about some investments he'd made with Mr. Davison.
I know Mr. Davison's whole family. I know his mother, I know his brothers, sister, and I just felt he was a good friend.
Many of the victims did not come forward and didn't do due diligence because they knew Pat, trusted him, because their buddies played golf with him, and because he was such a community leader.
In some instances, the victims are very reluctant to come forward. Sometimes it's embarrassment, sometimes they're still not sure if they've been defrauded. My position has always been, there is nothing wrong with telling the truth, and if the person truly is innocent, they'll come out fine. If they've committed a crime, we're going to do our darndest to get to the bottom of it and get to the truth.
In many cases, a broker that's involved in illegal activity occupies a position of respect in the community because they're involved in different community groups and occupy a high-profile position. And for those reasons, it can make it even more likely that an investor places their trust in that person and is reluctant to criticize that person.
Mr. Davison had spent years and years in service to both the community of Billings and the Catholic school system. The first time we became aware that there was a problem with the accounts was when we received notification from the state auditor's office. Our reaction, of course, was initially one of shock, and we progressed through disbelief and finally to outrage that funds that were so desperately needed for the school system were no longer available.
A con artist will defraud anyone, even their closest friends and family. Pat Davison took advantage of the trust he'd built in his community, using his connections and his family reputation to defraud people who let their guard down. To make matters worse, he counted on their shame and their fear of damaging their own reputations and relationships to stop them from coming forward to report him. Don't let yourself be put in a similar position. Pay attention to red flags. If someone, even a close friend or family member, is offering you an investment that sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Do your homework. Check with the state auditor's office. If the investment is legitimate, the person offering it won't mind you doing a little research.
I frequently get phone calls from people that have done business with family and friends and assumed everything was fine. And everything should be fine, and it almost always is.
Pat Davison is our ex-brother-in-law.
At that time, his current reputation was so strong in the investment field that it just seemed like a likely match. We were already at UBS with another investor, and so to move over with Pat was really not a big deal.
The family relationship and doing business with the relative, I was going into that a little bit with blind eyes. Pat offered us some initial investment opportunities. There was 10%, there was 13%. We were always satisfied with the 7 to 9% return annually.
And I remember him referring to the investment being backed somehow by the state of Montana, and somehow he talked so fast that it sounded likely.
If someone's promising you a high rate of return and they say there's no risk, that's just not true. It should be a red flag, and it's a good reason to investigate.
In March of 2003, having left UBS PaineWebber, Pat Davison lost his license to sell investments. But he didn't tell his clients. Instead, he moved down one floor from the UBS offices, got a post office box that was just one digit different from the UBS P.O. box number, and started a business for himself. Soon he was successfully selling investments like the St. Lebre Indian School Trust, MSU Foundation Assistance Group notes, and Billings Catholic Schools notes. All bogus investments that simply did not exist.
Mr. Davison, because of his position of trust in the community, was raising money in our names with private citizens. We were totally unaware that he was misusing our names in this regard to further his own scheme. It came as a shock to us when we learned. So in essence, we were victimized twice. Not only did he use our money fraudulently, but he also used our name, our good name in the community.
In the retirement phase of our life, it wasn't that you didn't have money, you didn't have any cash flow. And that's what we requested Mr. Davison to help us.
Wayne and Carol Eisenman lost over $1 million, a majority of their life savings, to Pat Davison. Wayne was retired from the railroad. Unfortunately, nearly all of his investment dollars were invested in the fraudulent companies that Mr. Davison was using to cover the Ponzi scheme.
Although we often see financial scams targeted at people who are especially vulnerable, sometimes even the most sophisticated investors can be the victims of financial crimes.
Jerry Dernbach is a retired pharmacist and a very well-known person in the Billings community. He was very helpful in the department by providing us with information on the many investments he made through Mr. Davison.
I originally met Pat actually through some things that he was doing for Central High School. Pretty much everybody that knew Pat at that time liked him a lot. He was gregarious, he was outgoing, likable.
When Pat left UBS, he did a unique thing. He had himself added as an interested third party to his former customers' statements. So he was receiving copies of their statements.
And Pat always knew when you sold a business, when you sold some additional stock, and within a short period of time, he would have a special deal for you.
He'd show up and provide added opportunities if you had some funds available, and of course he knew fairly well that you did.
He took the money away from their legitimate UBS account and put the money into his Ponzi scheme.
If a guy continually knows when you're having your best days and seems to have good things for you at that exact time, you might want to look over your shoulder.
Mr. Davison was hiding his activity by making it look legitimate under the guise of entities that didn't exist, that had no business purpose other than to funnel money through, to receive money from new investors and pay a rate of return to old investors.
Robin has his own business. I work for a company here in town part-time, and we have rental properties, we have children. We just have a very full life. Consequently, when I would ask for information on the investments, I wouldn't take the time to follow up on it, simply because my life was full, and that's a poor excuse, but it's the truth.
Well, again, I didn't do my homework.
I didn't know that the day he left Paine-Webber is he was no longer licensed to sell security.
Everybody offering and selling securities must be licensed in this state. If they leave a firm and join a new firm, or leave a firm and are still calling you, call and find out who you're doing business with and make sure they're licensed.
As the story evolved and the money kept increasing and the number of investors kept increasing, and of course the federal charges were brought, it was amazing. It was a big story.
For more than 10 years, Pat Davison had been able to fool some of the most educated and experienced investors in Billings. He used fake trusts, investments, bank accounts, statements, and even fake tax information to keep his scheme going. But all Ponzi schemes eventually collapse, and Pat Davison's was no exception. Eventually, he started running out of new investors. The high returns he'd promised others just didn't materialize. Davison started becoming late with payments and then missing them altogether. He'd run out of time. His scheme collapsed.
The department was inundated with calls from high-profile people in the Billings area that were victims of Mr. Davison.
He started hedging around as to saying, well, in one of the accounts it'd take me several months to round up that money, and I thought, well, that was kind of unusual.
The first thing that tipped me off was a late payment, a late interest payment. Interest payments move around a little bit, but this one moved more than it should have. I started looking closely at what was going on.
Investors expect paperwork, and Mr. Davison knew that. He would fabricate statements, oftentimes using gray paper with a blue line similar to the paper that UBS used, to appease investors to thinking that everything was fine.
Even though we were receiving bogus statements and their fraudulent nature was unknown to us, they appeared to be adequate.
The 1099s were, in fact, fabricated. The statements that he gave me were on what appeared to be legitimate business letterheads and all that kind of stuff, and in fact, those companies weren't even really in existence.
He was issuing bonds and telling people that their investment in those bonds was going to pay them a fixed annual return, when in fact the bonds were not real, they weren't investing in anything.
And I got another email from him at that time that said, we've rolled the bonds and we've reinvested them. And that was likewise one of the major issues that startled me, and I thought, you don't roll bonds. That I knew.
What happens at the end of a period of time is that the investment money that the investors put up for those investments is lost. And so they may be getting a monthly return or an annual return on their investment, but their principal is actually disappearing.
Everybody's trying to figure out where all the money's at.
I remember the check. I remember I was supposed to cash it on, I think it was September 8th. I did go to the bank and try and cash that check, and it was not good.
3 checks that he wrote to me, I went to our bank and I says, well, I'm going to cash these checks. That's when we found out they were not good funds. They were not only when they cover the whole $250,000, it didn't cover the first 50.
You know, I stood on his word, and the check was NSF. He flew the coop.
If you have money that you've invested to put money aside for the kids' college education, or to build up a nest egg for your retirement, or for whatever purpose, you have a responsibility to keep a close eye on that investment money. You can't just take that investment money, your hard-earned dollars, and put them in the hands of somebody else and forget about it.
From the time the first call came into the state auditor's office, things moved very quickly. Other clients of Davison were interviewed, and it soon became clear that there were many victims of Pat Davison's wrongdoing. The state auditor's office immediately notified the U.S. Attorney and the FBI, and a search warrant was issued for Davison's office. The state auditor's office developed a civil case, filed administrative action, and assisted in the federal prosecution of Davison. In the end, UBS PaineWebber agreed to reimburse many of Pat Davison's victims, even though several of them invested in the fraudulent scheme long after Davison left UBS.
I think we have a really significant development in the partnership that exists between the FBI and the State Auditor's Office and many of our offices of Inspector General in the state.
Sorting out what happened at UBS PaineWebber and what happened after that was one of the challenges that we had in this case.
Often in these cases there's 30,000 pages or more of documents that need to be reviewed, including statements, including bank records, all types of financial records.
Fortunately, UBS PaineWebber was a very cooperative partner in the investigation of this case and the effort to put together the $4.5 million in restitution to the victims.
Had not those funds been recovered, or a portion of them, it may have meant I would have had to go back to work.
Without those funds, the school system would have to resort to looking to the diocese for any subsidy to make up their budgets. Students would have been without financial aid when needed. We may have lost, or the students may have lost the opportunity to attend the Catholic school.
The charges against Pat Davison were actually pretty straightforward once we got the investigation done. It was clear that it was a Ponzi scheme, and there's a very particularized statute that deals with Ponzi schemes.
We work cooperatively in these relationships so that we can bring the person to justice and at the same time do what the administrative agency is supposed to do in terms of protecting investors and hopefully getting people's money back. We were working with the U.S. Attorney to bring Pat Davison to justice and to create that deterrent so that anybody who might be thinking of engaging in that kind of activity in the future would be dissuaded from doing it.
I think the reality is, if you look at these cases, and if I had a chance to talk to any similarly situated defendant, I would say the track record here is pretty clear that people are going to report this crime. It is going to be investigated. If it's investigated and if in fact a crime's occurred, it'll be charged. If it's charged, we're going to do everything we can to get a conviction. If in fact we get a conviction, which we believe we will or we wouldn't have charged it, then we're going to do everything we can to get a substantial sentence. Because the whole idea here is to make sure that the sentence reflects we've got to protect the public, we've got to make the victims whole, and at the end of the day, we've got to deter, and we're going to do that if we lock you up. That package is something that I think anybody who is sitting back thinking, I think I can get away with it, they really should think twice.
I wasn't aware of the resource we had in our state of Montana when we were going through all of this. And boy, if I could back up to last fall, they'd be my first phone call.
Do your homework. Don't just deal with your initial broker. Call the state auditor's office and have that broker looked at.
I hope that the community just learns to do a little bit better due diligence, learns that there was a community quietness here. The community needs to look at that, why this could go on for so long and be undetected.
In July 2007, Patrick Philip Davison was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for perpetrating a Ponzi scheme. The federal judge enhanced the sentence, noting that Davison had violated people's trust, operated a complex scheme involving multiple victims, and used the names of charitable organizations to defraud people. The Montana State Auditor's Office banned Pat Davison from the securities industry for life and levied a $250,000 fine against him. The Auditor's Office also reached an agreement with Pat Davison's former employer, UBS Paine Webber. The company agreed to pay over $4.5 million in restitution to the 9 victims identified by the state. Pat Davison was ordered to repay UBS Paine Webber the $4.5 million it paid in restitution and to pay an additional $950,000 to his former mother-in-law, brother, and sister-in-law. Davison is currently serving his sentence in an Oregon prison. So how do you protect yourself in the investment world? Here's your Montana State Auditor with some important tips.
Here are the top 10 tips from our office. 1. Check out the broker and firm before you invest with them. Call the State Auditor's Office to make sure the person and the firm are licensed and to see if they have any complaints or disciplinary actions against them. 2. Meet with your broker and visit the firm. Investments are a major financial undertaking, and you should be as careful as you would with any other major asset you own. 3. Keep good notes of communications with your broker or advisor. Taking notes when you're talking to your broker will help if there's a problem. 4. Stay in charge of your money. Monitor your accounts and keep track of your investments. You should be receiving statements and confirmations. If you're not receiving these documents on a regular basis, it could be a sign of trouble. 5. If investments that you did not authorize appear on your confirmations or account statements, contact your broker and the State Auditor's Office immediately. Don't wait to see how the investments perform. 6. Conduct independent research on your investments. It's a good idea to thoroughly read prospectuses, research reports, offering materials, and annual reports to verify what you've been told about an investment. 7. Do not make checks or other payments payable to your broker, advisor, or any other individual for an investment. In most cases, money should be only sent to your brokerage firm or its clearing firm. 8. Review your portfolio from time to time. Make sure the securities in your account still meet your investment objectives. Make sure you understand and are comfortable with the risks, costs, and liquidity of your investments. 9. Don't judge a book by its cover. Just because your financial advisor is a friend or even a family member doesn't mean you shouldn't check them out or that you don't need to monitor your account. 10. Don't let embarrassment or fear keep you from reporting investment fraud or abuse to the State Auditor's Office. Investment fraud can happen to anyone, from someone who doesn't know the first thing about investment to someone with a lot of investment experience and knowledge. Chances are, if you've been scammed, you're not alone. If you come forward, you'll not only be helping yourself, but you could save someone else from financial harm.
As these stories have shown you, fraud can happen to anyone, anywhere. To the man who only graduated from the 8th grade and to someone with a master's degree. To the woman living in the nursing home and to the man with the mansion. To the widow who never handled the money until her spouse's death, and to the certified public accountant. All were defrauded. All were taken advantage of by someone they trusted. Don't let this happen to you. Be safe, pay attention, and report any suspicious behavior or activity to the State Auditor's Office. It's your money. It's your future.